IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. Cricket in India is a national obsession. Some say even a national religion. Crowds turn up wherever India is playing in whichever format, from IPL to Test matches. The team's fortunes are closely followed, and most of all, players can make a lot of money, big money, especially those who perform well. Indians have always been fans of cricket, and stadiums were packed on all 5 days during Test matches going back to the 60s. But players got modest salaries well up to the 80s. Ayaz Memon, who's our guest today, has followed the trajectory of Indian sport, especially of cricket, for over 4 decades. He began as a cub reporter and grew to be one of the most authoritative commentators on the game, covering it for a number of papers, and now, like many others, has moved into channels and digital platforms. His new book, Indian Innings, is a curation of articles written by some of the best-known writers, journalists, academics on Indian cricket going back to a long, long time. He joins us today to speak about not just cricket of the past, but also the present and perhaps the future. Ayaz Memon, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you, Sidharth. Thank you for having me on the show.
Tell us first, how did the book come about and how easy or difficult was it, given that there are articles from so many publications? Getting copyright clearances must have been a nightmare. And of course, the pandemic, which delayed everything.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was an idea swirling in my head for a long time. And the original idea was to try and see if I can get the best writing on Indian cricket on one platform or one book, like an anthology of the best Indian writing on cricket. So I set myself a couple of parameters. I said it should be all about Indian cricket, written by Indian writers, journalists or otherwise, and published in Indian publications. I've more or less stuck to that, barring one or two digressions. I've got a couple of pieces. One is from the Melbourne Age, but written by David McMahon, who used to be part of the Indian media scene not too long back, or at least when I was with Sports Week, he was with Sports World, so he was a rival as well as a friend. He's now migrated to Australia. I got an article from Mihir Bose's book, The Nine Waves. Mihir Bose, of course, lives in England. I'm sure he's also holding a British passport, but he's a person of Indian origin, and so is Ashish Ray. So I kind of expanded the scope a little bit to incorporate these voices, their articles also in the anthology. And I thought that, through the collection of articles, best writings, I would be able to present a fairly vivid picture of Indian cricket as it has emerged from 1947. I didn't want to go back to 1932 when India played its first Test match, or even earlier when the Parsis played and Parsis teams went to England and stuff like that. I thought I'll make this a journey about independent India. And along the way, I found one is that it was a humongous, the scope of the book was humongous. I tossed this idea a couple of times with Dr. Ramchandra Guha, whenever he was in Bombay or somewhere we would meet. And, so he would always tell me, it's a great idea, you must do it, don't let it lapse. But it kind of germinated in my mind. And then what I realized that when I started accessing articles in newspapers, Times of India, the Hindu, the Indian Express, I found that actually in the first decade of maybe 15, 18 years, say from 47 to maybe 65, 66, the writing in newspapers wasn't extensive. And if there was a lot of articles published, which there were because India was a cricket-mad country even then, a lot of the articles didn't have bylines. It was by our sports reporter, or very early on, there were some bylines of Englishmen or other people who wrote on the sport, not Indian journalists, and so on. And therefore, I found that became a bit of a limitation. And I tweaked it around a little bit, the idea, and I said, let me look at inflection points, major inflection points in Indian cricket, and take a narrative from 1947 to 2020, the end of 2020, which is where it kind of cuts off the book.
But it sounds like a pretty grand project in terms of dimension. And did the difficulties kick in when you went out to get those articles?
Absolutely. I mean, when you say grand project, it was like making Mughal-e-Azam, in a sense, or Sholay, if you want more contemporary example. But yes, the hardship was there. First is, Sidharth, I'm a journalist. I'm a fellow journeyman like you in your profession. I'm not a historian, and there is a certain rigor and a robustness of process and the search and the hunt, which comes differently to a historian, a professional historian or an academic than it would to a journalist. So that was one, I realized that could be a limitation for myself. The other and the most serious limitation I found was, getting access to newspaper or news organizations can be very cumbersome, because while the archives have got a little more modernized, there are still many stumbling blocks, in terms of facility or facilitation. I don't think people still understand the importance of research. People who are in these posts in various organizations. I mean, some were very good. I mean, the Hindu was absolutely fantastic. When I wrote to them through the net, through mails and all, it was facilitated. I went there, and everything was laid out. It was kind of pre-done for me when I went. So the search became that much easier. And then, of course, there are costs involved in terms of how much can you pay for the archive. I must be thankful that almost, barring a couple, I wasn't charged much, or I wasn't charged at all. In many cases, I wrote to them. I said, "Listen, this is the article that I've got, which I want to use, and if I have your permission, I can use it." But what I had done before that, so when I talked of the best articles that could be on Indian cricket, I wrote off mails to about 25, 30 people who I knew, journalists like Dr. Ram Guha, Suresh Menon, Rohit Brijnath, Charla Ugra, a lot of them, inviting, pieces from them. I said, you send me what you think are your best or, worthy of publication, and sort of what I was attempting. And they all sent me their articles. And I wanted to draw up a second list and send it to more people, And then it got into a bit of a limbo when the thrust shifted from just great writing, where there was a limitation I found more in the era of 47 to 65, almost till 1970. And I found that from 1971, it just gets bigger and better, because the media also gets bigger and better. And there's more drama and etc., which is portrayed in these newspapers and magazines and stuff, which didn't have earlier, which didn't happen earlier. So I thought I'll make this a journey of milestones and inflection points in Indian cricket. So I didn't send out inviting the second list of articles. I started my search a little differently, and then of course came the pandemic in the late 1919. So I had done my search for a few newspaper offices. Then perforce it had to be stopped, and I almost thought that this project would not take off. I had met Westland's publisher Kartika in one of the lit fests in Trivandrum, I think. And I tossed this idea at her. She was very excited, and she said, "We must do it." And then everybody ran into the pandemic, and there was, it was kind of muted, the entire thing, from the publisher's point of view, from my point of view. And then suddenly we got a little hyperactive, approaching, I think, May, June of 2020. And I just, kind of put my foot on the accelerator. There was a lot of cricket had resumed by then, international cricket to an extent. India went to Australia. Team Pakistan, West Indies went to England. We were coming out of the pandemic. And then it became, a search again for getting articles from newspapers. And a lot of that I depended on then from the net, because we still couldn't travel. So whatever search I had done in TOI or Hindu or the Indian Express or elsewhere, that was there. But the further search was defined by what I could access on the net and reach out and try and plug in the gaps which I thought were in the narrative originally planned. So there'll be omissions, there'll be lots of disputed material which is there, and somebody will say, why the hell this and why not that, which I completely accept. I also accept that there might be a lot of articles which may have been better. You could say qualitatively better or more pertinent. There will be a lot of writers I've missed out on. But I thought that along with the journey of Indian cricket till India reaches 75 years, I had to complete the journey of this book also, otherwise it will never get completed.
Ayaz, you mentioned 1971. Now that brings back, a whole range of memories of, everybody in the country staying awake to listen to commentary from West Indies, because that went on. It was on radio, and it went on at a very odd time for us, of a victory in West Indies and a victory in England, the first 2 back-to-back overseas tours victory for India. And it kind of set the country on fire, because that changed the national mood so much. And it brings back the memories of K.N. Prabhu reporting from Trinidad and other venues and writing, in a kind of poetic way. But my question is, of course, you've written about history, but are newer readers interested in, newer audiences interested in that, going back that far in Prabhu's writing on Trinidad? They'll say, what's the big deal about winning 2 series? Many young cricketers many young fans would be interested in Virat Kohli, maybe Dhoni. But there's a lack of generational memory or a sense of history, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that's one of the purposes of this book. That is one of the reasons why, I went after this kind of a venture. So, I mean, look, when you think about doing something like this, either you take it on yourself, the onus, and say, I will write it. And then you are a historian as well as a writer, and then you do all the research and come up, which, people like Rambo have done in various ways, Boria Majumdar has done, Mihir Bose has done, and so on. There are lots of people who have, attempted or done it and done it quite successfully. I thought that, I'll get a myriad voices. So it is a little more kaleidoscopic. That was my, intention. For reasons mentioned earlier, that I'm not a historian. Now, what you mentioned is right. But the target was also, look, we're living in 2021. And a lot of the people who are following the sport today, even their fathers may have not been born in 1947 or 45 or 55 or 60, And there's such a huge gap in understanding. I mean, why just about cricket, Sidharth? In every sphere of life, our life, national life, whether it is politics or business or environment or entertainment or society, there's such a huge knowledge gap. There's such a huge information gap. And the threat today for all of, as I call it a threat very deliberately, is that everybody is kind of being weaned on WhatsApp University rather than real stuff. And it's not so difficult if you have the inclination to go and access information. But yes, it requires a certain discipline and a certain curiosity and a certain desire. Now, I thought, can I fulfill or can I meet those, put these together and meet those demands and try and reach out to an audience which is going to be far, far younger. You and I are of the same vintage, and we remember with even utter delight, even now, what happened in 1971. And that's why even the book picks up pace from 1971, because that's the time when I also got hooked completely to cricket and the 50-year journey since. But there's also a lot to be said about 47. Imagine, the lead-in into 1947, and the biggest tournament before that is the quadrangular and the pentangular. Not many people know about that and why it was stopped. And then what happened? There were players who played for India who went on to play for Pakistan. India's first ever cricket tour post-independence was against Don Bradman's team. We went to Australia and played Don Bradman. And Vijay Hazare made 200s in a test match in Adelaide against Bradman's Invincibles. Hazare's contribution in that from 47 to 55, 56 till whenever he retired is monumental. So, and the biggest character then, in my opinion, apart from Vijay Merchant, whose career finished by 52. So post-independent India, Vijay Merchant is not such a big figure as a player, but of course he becomes a very big figure as a selector and as a voice, as a conscience keeper of Indian cricket in the subsequent decade. And of course, in the ouster of Nawab of Pataudi from the captaincy in 1970-71. But the biggest figure is Vinu Mankad, who is the chief architect of India's first ever test win. in 1951 against England. He's the chief architect in the first ever win over Pakistan, in 1952-53. Very emotional series, obviously, given what has happened 4, 5, 6 years earlier. He shares the first world record with Pankaj Roy, highest first wicket partnership. He has a terrific time in 1952 in England at Lords. There are only 2 test matches named after players for their contribution in that match. One is Vinu Mankar's test, it's called the 1952 test against England at Lords. And then there's Ian Botham's test in 1981, the Ashes test at Leeds. So Vinu Mankad, and as a character and as a player, as an all-rounder, I wish that I knew more about him, though I got to know his children later. Ashok Mankad spoke to me a lot about his father, the late Ashok Mankad. And I said, gosh, what a wonderful player and character he was. He had a very sharp tongue. He wouldn't take nonsense from anybody. He, in fact, fought with Colonel C.K. Naidu, one of the legends of the game. Naidu, by 1952, was the selector. And Vinu Mankad said, you have to give me an assurance I'll be in the team. Otherwise, I've got a contract in the English league. And C.K. Naidu said, you're playing for India, I give assurance to nobody. So Vinu Mankad didn't go as part of the Indian team to England in 1952. And while he was playing league cricket there, he was summoned into the team because the team obviously was not a full-strength team without Vinu Mankad. So all this drama that transpired, some of it is in the book, some of it I'm telling you as it transpired. I mean, give you an example of what all, it also tells you how Indian cricket was and the tugs and pulls and the shenanigans. 58-59, one series, there are 4 captains in 5 test matches. Imagine the parochialism that existed in the power politics within the board itself. 1961-62, Nari Contractors team beats Ted Dexter's team. And then, of course, the team is to be chosen to go to the West Indies. And there's no Subhash Gupta and there's no Kripal Singh. Why? Because in a match in Delhi, Kripal Singh and Subhash Gupta, it was found that they had some lady visitors to their room. And that was the kind of mindset. And they said, oh, if this is the case, you can't go on tour. So Subhash Gupta, the best bowler India had then, and Kripal Singh, who was also in very good form, couldn't go to West Indies, where Nari Contractor got hit and Tiger Pathaudi became a captain at the age of 21. I mean, all this, anybody who's interested in sport, in cricket, they must have this information, they must have this knowledge. And I thought if I can bring all of that and subsequently right up to the modern age, yes, everybody knows Kohli and Dhoni and Tendulkar and Dravid. And also there's been an implosion in the media and cable TV penetration, and people are watching action real time. Earlier, people had to wait for the newspaper to come the next morning to understand what has happened, or a magazine to come the next week. Or if you had the inclination to wake up long hours as you did and I did when India won the West Indies in 71, put a radio or a transistor to your head, to your ears, and maybe doze off and keep waking up because given the time difference, it had to be early morning that you were listening to the commentary. But that was the passion. And I think that there is a need for people in India who are cricket lovers to understand the high drama, the heroes that existed, the high drama that has transpired, not just since TV brought it into our homes, but even otherwise. The first match I ever saw was at the CCI in the Islam Gymkhana stands. Some relative of mine had tickets. Not the first 2 days. I saw the last 3 days. It was a humdinger. We won that match. Tiger Pathaudi's team beating Bobby Simpson's team narrowly. Chandu Borde made 33. I remember that. Indrajit Singh made, the wicketkeeper, he made 3. Pathaudi's regal presence on the field, he batted superbly in that match, fielded brilliantly. And then I remember when India, the winning run was scored, and everybody jumped out of the stands from the east stand or the north stand or the west stands where we were. Islam Gymkhana was located from the pavilion. The doors opened, everybody spilled onto the ground and went up to the CCI pavilion, chanting, slogans in favor of India, Borde, Pathaudi, till they came onto the balcony and waved out. I mean, that is a memory which, unfortunately, we don't see much of it today now. It's all televised. Sometimes you feel also it's not as spontaneous as it used to be earlier. But that's being value judgmental. I think from the younger generation's point of view, whatever they are doing, they see it fit. But overall, I think the marvelous journey that Indian cricket has had from 1947 or even earlier is something to be proud of, obviously, and celebrated. But also it needs a lot of understanding from the current and the modern generation.
So that, I mean, it's clear that your passion for history is as much as for the game today. Now, you spoke about all the changes that have taken place, and some things have remained the same, some have changed. The way we play cricket has changed. But, one of the things I and you must have noticed, and maybe others with a sense of history have noticed, the way the composition of our team and our players has subtly shifted. I mean, I'll give you an example. In the 1960s, the dominant figures were from the upper strata. Before that, it was the Maharajas, but the dominant figures were from the upper strata. Pataudi was a royal like Hanuman Singh. There was also Abbas Ali Beg. Before that, Vijay Merchant, who came from an industrial family. Though many players were middle class, but these were the figures that stood out. Then came the proper middle classes, professional, mainly urban.
Yeah.
Wadekar, Gavaskar, even Chandrasekhar and Vishwanath. And then, of course, the small town players such as Dhoni and Sehwag. And now people are coming from all kinds of places thanks to the coaching and the talent that brings out the coaching. So how has this impacted the game as such?
So I think it's made cricket very intrinsic to Indian life. You're right. I mean, when you look at this trajectory, and you actually spoken about it quite vividly. So it came first. The Parsis kind of took to the game first, then the royalty, because obviously there was a proximity to be gained with playing a sport that the colonial masters enjoyed, and then by themselves they couldn't make up numbers. So then the royals became patrons. I mean, you talked about Nawab Pataudi being a royal himself, and he was a player, a fantastic player, both the Pataudis. But there's also Mushtaq Ali, who was, part of the Holkar, kind of supported by the Holkar royal family. So Salim Durrani, from Jamnagar, the royals started taking care of players and put up teams, and it also meant it fed their own egos. Who kiska player zyada better hai? Who will going to play for India? So there was a little competition amongst the royals also to score brownie points. Apart from the larger objective of being in sync with the colonial masters, and then because cricket even then was not a cheap sport. I mean, much cheaper than what it is today. But you still needed a bat, gloves, ball, and it all costs money. So therefore, the people like Vijay Merchant and all, it became easier for them. Vijay Merchant used to get a coach from England to come and coach him privately. And so he owned a magnificent property. He could have his own pitch rolled out and stuff like that. But some of the others couldn't. And therefore, I think also when you enter post-independent India, and certainly after when the 50s and 60s come, and when the middle class it's not an invasion, but it's middle class participation becomes very dominant in cricket is for jobs. Wadekar was an employee of, first to get into a job. He was an MSc, BSc, he got a job. He worked with State Bank of India all his life. Sunil Gavaskar joined ACC where his uncle was also working, Madhav Mantri. And then he moved on to Nidalon, right up to the Dravids and, Rahul Dravid. At the age of 19, 20 or 21, he got a job with India Cement, which he still holds. So, I mean, that was the big middle class aspiration, that somehow you must get a job, whether you got a job with the public sector undertaking or private sector, you had to get a job. And therefore, the teams proliferated. Private sector teams came into being, the Tatas, the Mahindras, and, all of this. All of these teams, Netherlands, they started having cricket teams and other sports also. And jobs became important. You played cricket in season, off season, you went back to your job. That, I think the big change happened subsequently. And I call that the Tendulkar phenomenon, which happened in 1989 or a little earlier, when a 14-year-old boy became national news, making a world record score. And then the success he had as a 16-year-old right up to the time he was 40. And by that time, of course, lots of things were changing. And Sachin's career his arrival coincided with liberalization, more money coming in. After money started coming in for your skill and for your talent and for your prowess, then the job became secondary. So if you go to Shivaji-Pak nowadays, or Cross Maidan, or any of the Maidans, or any Maidan anywhere in the country, where earlier, people, your parents or the elders in the family would tell you, come on, stop wasting time, don't pursue sport, padhai karo. Now, young mums and dads go to the Maidans and tell the coaches, हमारे लड़के को कोहली बना दो या तेंदुलकर बना दो, forget about studies. Because it has become a full-time vocation, and a very handsomely rewarding vocation that, if you can make the cut. And after that has come, of course, the IPL, which has just made the entire ecosystem grow manifold. Now, even if you're not playing for India, but you're playing for an IPL team, even if you're on the bench of the reserves, you'll end up making, at the minimum, about 20-25 lakhs a year, which is very good money by any yardstick. You don't have to be a Kohli or a Dhoni or a Rohit Sharma who's earning 16-17 crore. I mean, for that you need to pass many barriers. But look at the opportunities that exist for people who are getting into cricket, even if they don't make it. I mean, the ultimate for any player is reaching the test team. And then if not that, the ODI team and the T20 team, but wearing the India cap is the ultimate achievement. But below that, there are several options available. Even people playing domestic cricket now, Ranji Trophy and Duleep Trophy, they can make 15-20 lakh a year. And apart from all that, of course, in the ecosystem is jobs like coaches and trainers and masseurs and media managers and PR guys. And the whole ecosystem, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry today, Indian cricket. And the footprint of the sport is across the nation, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from the east to the north and the west, wherever. And therefore, you'll find that and it's become such an aspirational journey for what we used to think was hinterland India first. So now the players are coming from everywhere and they're very good. They're damn hungry for success. And that's why Indian cricket has become so consistently good. I mean, they may not have won titles. I mean, I thought the World Test Championship, inaugural one, we could have won because we were the best team over 4 years. We didn't win that. We didn't win the 2019 World Cup. We were the best team over 4 or 5 years in that format. And, let's see what happens now in the World T20 as we speak. We've lost the first match against Pakistan and a little on the back foot, but we could still make headway there. But the point I'm trying to make is that the quality of talent, the pyramid base has become so huge, Sidharth, that the elite level, what you get at the top, the elite level players, the numbers have also increased exponentially. And therefore, I know it sounds rhetorical, but India can very well field 2 international teams today in the sport, if not 3.
Ayaz, I'm going to advance a theory, and you touched upon it in passing about the hunger and the rewards perhaps at the end of it. But I'm going to test this theory and you tell me where it stands. Each of these transitions, more or less, social transitions, have yielded rewards. Because when you saw the 1970s, under the so-called middle-class State Bank of India cricketer and the young Shivaji-Pak boy, Sunil Gavaskar, we won 2 back-to-back overseas series for the first time under Wadekar. Under Kapil Dev, who came a little later, but also came from a relatively small place compared to the others who also were from Mumbai, or Bombay as it was in those days, Madras, and other centers. So now here comes Kapil Dev and rises to the top, and we won the first World Cup under him in 1983. Then comes Dhoni, unknown from obscure cities, so to speak, puts Ranchi on the world map, or at least the Indian map. And under him, we win the inaugural T20. So each of these transitions have brought fresh energy and more victories. This is just a unscientific theory.
No, but it's an excellent observation. It's an excellent observation, Sidharth, because it's there. I mean, it's in front of us. So you don't need validation. We know what happened. Wadekar coming in and you win 2. Pataudi is no longer there. I think and since you mentioned it in this fashion, it dawned on me to add to it. I think that these guys who came in, first of all, nobody expected them to be captains. They were good players. And they came in, nobody knew what at least in Wadekar's case, he was not a complete youngster. He was 26 by the time he played for India. And he had been a part of Mumbai's team. Mumbai was multiple times Ranji Trophy winning side. But they came and actually made a shift in the status quo in terms of thinking, in terms of getting things done. So just to give you an example, India beating West Indies in 1971. And I remember this speaking to Wadekar. I had some great conversations with Wadekar when he was alive. He was a delightful man to know. That in the first test, when he asked Gary Sobers that West Indies should follow on, Sobers was taken aback because he didn't realize that if you score less than 300, the number of runs you need to enforce the follow-on also reduces. So Wadekar says that the great Gary Sobers didn't know that this was the rule, and he was astonished. And I had to point to him the rule. So Wadekar, being a banker and a man of understanding fine details, knew what the laws were. The other thing was, look at him. I mean, the courage to tell Gary Sobers, come on, this is how you need to do it. And they were, of course, thick friends later. But I think Kapil Dev, when he became captain, he had replaced Sunil Gavaskar's captain. Those were mighty boots to fill. And in the World Cup, frankly, I was there for that World Cup, 1983 World Cup, and nobody gave India a hope in hell. And he played, everybody knows that 175 not out with abandon, the way he played and turned that match around in the tournament, and the catch he took in the final against West Indies, Viv Richards' catch. But also what transpired behind. I mean, the way he captained the team, the way he spoke to the guys. He was not a man of too many theories and, giving monologues in the dressing room. He was more inspirational. Chalo, ye karte hain. Aaj ye karna hai. Aaj aise jeetna hai. And when I say change in status quo, there was a certain theoretical way in which matches were approached by Indian teams. That changed with Wadekar, with Kapil Dev, and also with Dhoni. Dhoni came from the boondocks. You look at his entire cricket. I mean, he's a very unorthodox wicketkeeper. His batting is very unorthodox, and his thinking was unorthodox. 2007, the T20 World Cup, which we won, and which actually made T20 cricket such a monumental property as it is today, was India beating Pakistan in the final. And who he gave the ball to in the final was Joginder Sharma, who nobody expected would bowl the last over. But Dhoni, in his own mind, maybe he thought that everybody's expecting somebody else, and I'll give a rookie or somebody who nobody expects, and maybe he'll deliver for me, and the guy delivers. So the change in status quo and thinking. In the 2011 World Cup, India chasing a Sri Lanka score, which is not very mighty, but there's a bit of a stutter, and he promotes himself ahead of Yuvraj Singh and whoever else, goes on to play a match-winning innings and finishes the match with a 6. So the change in, ultimately, the captain's role is so decisive in this sport. There is no other sport like cricket where the captain matters so much, because captain is a constant interventionist in the passage of play. You can ask a bowler to bowl from one end or from the other end. You can change the field when you want. You can change the batting order, and that's where the captain involves himself all the time. In no other sport is the captain so central to everything that happens on the field. And therefore, I think all these three examples that you've given are fantastic examples. And in my opinion, it reflects actually a change in status quo at that point in time. I mean, ultimately, maybe Dhoni's methods also become status quo. It may happen over a period of time, and somebody else will have to come and do something else. But if you look at what happened with, say, Viv Richards, Clive Lloyd and Viv Richards, that great West Indies domination continued for 15, 16 years in one pattern. So too the Australian domination from, say, 1984 to 2007-10, whether it was Steve Waugh, the captain, or Ricky Ponting or Mark Taylor, the planning and the methodology of their wins were more or less similar. In India's case, you see the shift every time there is these kind of characters come up, and they all come from play, they're all unexpected appointments who come and make major changes. And these are all featured as major inflection points in the book that I've put, through articles and small notes and scorecards that are there.
Yeah, in fact, those articles at the end of it, Ayaz, your comments and all that, put the whole thing in quite a good context. We'll be right back after this short break.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With Coinswitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes Coinswitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download Coinswitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into A Show About Crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. Coinswitch, kuch to badlega.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. Now, you spoke earlier about the money. Even the bench player can make 20-25 lakhs. The bigger players, the elite players, make a lot of money thanks to endorsements and thanks to the IPL, the auction system. But at the same time, fans sometimes have begun to, all the time, in fact, expect a lot. And it's quite bizarre to see an ad featuring a cricketer soon after they've lost a match badly on the same channel. And maybe fans may think that these cricketers are more focused on endorsement contracts than on the games, and they are careless. I mean, you've seen a lot of matches in which the players have been quite sluggish.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the world has changed from the 50s and 60s, 70s, even 80s to now. People, they are professional cricketers, full-time cricketers, and they don't have jobs. Their job is to play cricket. So you would expect them, therefore, to be performing their jobs to the best of their ability, which means that you have to be physically fit, mentally fit, coached well, ready. They are like gladiators today. So there is no scope. I mean, the allowance which we used to give earlier, TK, it's a game and it's a sport. All that is diminishing. Patience with those kind of arguments is diminished. And it's happened across sports internationally, and especially even in team sports. At the individual level, if a Federer is injured and he has a bad match, it's Federer's, tough luck and bad luck to him. Beyond that, nobody, goes. But if you're playing the Davis Cup for Switzerland, yes, people would say, why is he playing? Likewise, in football or hockey or cricket, these dimensions have come in more so because the monetary gains have become phenomenal. And therefore, people say, if you're getting so much money, then you have to deliver the results to me, and therefore the expectations are sky high and the patience is just about a postage stamp, space you give them. So all that has happened. And I think that you have to take the flak and the brickbats with the rewards that you get. And also the other thing which has happened, Sidharth, is that it's also become extremely competitive. And therefore, players are living on the edge. It might seem very rosy. I mean, I can give you examples in IPL, which is so rewarding monetarily. But there are guys who had one great season. Their values went up in the next auction. It went from lakhs to crores. And then the next season, it's come thudding down because you couldn't live up to the hype, the hoopla, and of course, the expectations. So that also happens. You can lose your place in the Indian team. And now because there's so many players available, you have to just go back to the end of the queue and then try and make a comeback. And that can get very, very difficult. So, the challenges are there for, even for the best performing players. If they have a lean drought or a poor season, that could, unless you're so driven and so mentally tough and willing to go through the rigor again, it would spell the end of your career. So these challenges are there.
So yes, expectations, even audience expectations have increased that, we had so much faith in
and
you.
And let me, Sidharth, just to highlight again, the IPL is very unforgiving. No franchise owner wants passengers. Maybe somebody in your family was unwell, so you've had a bad day or an off day. That won't work. If it's the BCCI or the cricket board, there may be a little more buffer available because, it's not so commerce driven or ego driven or, saying my team must be better than the other person's and therefore I want everybody to perform. There is a lot of very hard scrutiny if you're playing for the IPL by all teams.
No, you're right. I mean, the point I was trying to make is always also that owners' expectations have changed. Selectors have more options. But audience expectations have also changed. They can't tolerate losses. But the The other side, or the kind of corollary to that, is that it's also become intertwined with aggressive nationalism, which is much more than the healthy kind of nationalism or pride. See what happened after India lost to Pakistan recently.
Right.
Then there is the trolling of Shami, for example. And unfortunately, and this actually I'm leading toward this, very few current players stood up for their colleagues who were being trolled. Cricketers rarely speak up on contentious issues because they have also become a little wary, and many just, to see many top cricketers cutting and pasting the same tweet as if they're puppets is not. So the nationalism has got embedded is so much all around us that the whole nature of the game has become, I dare say, somewhat uglier.
I mean, there are obviously perils of the sport, any sport becoming so big. I mean, you know it and I know it for many, many years. Even now, cricket is not your official game, national game. It was hockey for countless decades. But cricket became richer because it was managed better. The finances were done better and so on. BCCI has many, many issues and many sins of omission and commission. But what it has done successfully is to spread the gospel of cricket across the length and breadth of the country. That said, so there are two aspects to this, and I want to touch on both. Yes, of course, there is this nationalism versus jingoism, and harmful jingoism is what I term it. Jingoism by definition is hurtful and harmful, but it gets even more accentuated when it comes to cricket, and it gets even worse when it comes to cricket between India and Pakistan. And so that is something that it is reflecting at all times the socio-political environment in the country. From the time of the first series in 1952-53 to now. I mean, in the 50s, Sidharth, the first series when Pakistan came here, 52, we beat Pakistan 2-1. The next series, we went there 5 matches, all 5 drawn. In 61-62, Pakistan came here again to India, all 5 matches drawn. Neither team wanted to lose. The first priority was harna nahi hai. So it produced what I call DDD, dull and dreary cricket. And therefore it became and then of course there were 2 wars and cricket didn't resume for 17 years till 1978. And I also wanted to highlight this. It's very interesting that in 78 when it resumed, it wasn't the kind of a socialist Congress government in power. It was actually the Janata Party. And the man who led the initiative was Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was then the foreign minister, as it was called, in 1978. And, kind of this cricket tour was brokered and stuff. In 2004, after Kargil, 5 years, there was no bilateral cricket between India and Pakistan. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the prime minister when cricket was resumed. In 1987-88, when soldiers on either side of the border were in eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation, Ziaul Haq came down and had parleys with the political parties in India, came down ostensibly for cricket, and cricket politics worked and the tension was diffused. The most interesting is 1987 World Cup coming to India. Now, we all know that in 1983, when India was winning the World Cup at Lord's, the BCCI's then President NKP Salve, Jagmohan Dalmia, Ayaz Bindra was spurned. They were not given passes or extra passes for the match. And they were smarting under it and they said, "Inko sabak sikhana hai, we'll take the World Cup to India." But how do you take the World Cup to India? So there was parleys between the Indian Cricket Board and the Pakistan Cricket Board, and through them to the respective governments. And the 87 World Cup was a joint affair between India and Pakistan. It was called the Reliance Cup, but it was jointly hosted by India and Pakistan. So there have been troughs and crests in Chennai when Pakistan beat India in Madras in 98, Tendulkar making a magnificent century which went in vain. The entire crowd stood up and applauded and celebrated Pakistan's victory. So too when India went to Pakistan and beat them in 2004. So there have been currents and cross currents and tempers on the boil on either side, but as at all times I think this has reflected the socio-political scenario which has been prevalent in either country. So I personally feel bilateral cricket ties are healthy because that gives you an option to improve relations rather than shutting down everything. If you almost everything else is being shut down. If you even in sports you're going to shut down, that leaves you very little to do. Entertainment culture we are shutting down. Diplomacy is on the doldrums. So what remains then? Every time you have an ICC tournament like this, the hostility levels rise because there has been no other contact. And therefore, we see all these things happening. And of course, now in this day and age of social media, people are getting trolled mightily. I mean, Shami got trolled for no reason. I mean, if you look at his records, he's been amongst your best performing players in the last 2-3 years. And from there, from the other side, I mean, somebody like a Waqar Yunus, former Pakistan captain, coming up with a statement saying, this guy prayed namaz and it looked so good because surrounded by a team of Hindus. Some words to that effect. It was obnoxious. And somebody like Waqar Yunus. But I agree. I think that in such situations, it is incumbent. Of course, it's an option for them. I think it's incumbent that players stand up and stand up for what they believe in and come to the support of a Shami or any of the players getting lampooned and bitterly lampooned. Imagine you're going back into the same dressing room, the same dugout, and you're with players and you look around and say, not one guy spoke up about me. I mean, there is Tendulkar and Sehwag and some others who have spoken out. But from the current team, I think when Moeen Ali ran into a problem in England, the entire English team went to his support. So I think that support has become more and more important as we enter in the current climes that we live in, and the way media and multimedia options are being exploited by trolls all over the world. Black Lives Matter. Just to digressions from Indo-Pak cricket, Quinton de Kock, South Africa's opening batsman, wicketkeeper, wonderful player, refused to take the knee while his team did, and therefore he had to be pulled out from the match. Now, what is the message he's sending about racism? Maybe he does support Black Lives Matter, but is there a show he's making about it? Or what he's doing is actually affecting the fight against racism? So these are things that I think people need to be cognizant about, and especially players they know, it's not that they are unaware. The other aspect about big money and the superstardom that you get, there's also the underbelly that comes in. So we've seen that, corruption, the malaise of corruption. It came into the IPL, before that in international cricket in 1999, 2000, when the scam first broke. Now this is the peril of, too much money coming into a sport. And therefore, what regulatory methods need to come in, or processes need to be put in place. You and I mean, you more than me would know about the stock exchange and the scams that happened before SEBI came in. When there's such an influx of money, and there is a grisly underbelly that develops. If it goes unchecked, it becomes rampant. It can destroy, it can pull down the whole edifice. So therefore, the minders of the sport, the respective cricket boards, the ICC, the players themselves, ultimately it's the players. You choose to be corrupt or not. The players themselves also owe a massive responsibility to ensuring that the sport remains clean and above board.
You mentioned the players in another very relevant context and touched upon it, that Shami can come into a dressing room and looks around and to say nobody stood up for him, and the players should show their support to their colleague, like in the case of Moeen Ali. That's what I meant when I say that, they become so subdued.
Yeah, that is true. So the point is not that they wouldn't have supported him. I'm sure they would have gone and, personally, at a personal level, supported him. But I think these are the times when there also needs to be a public, statement or a public rallying behind a player who's part of your team, who's being lampooned for no reason, only purely on jingoistic grounds or communal grounds. And that is something that, at least in India, cricket has never been communal. And one of the things which really affected, it shook me also, was not about Shami now, but last year in the Uttarakhand Cricket Association, there was an allegation against Wasim Jafar, who was a coach by some elements from that association, that, he is good, that players were offering namaz in the dressing room or some nonsense like that. And of course, those people were shut down by the BCCI. But I'm saying that is the lurking threat. And therefore, it is important for players of larger than life profile, the Dhonis, the Kohlis, the Shastris, and all of them, to come up. And because their voices, what they say, makes an impact on these trolls and whoever else there might be who try and hijack. And it's not hijack, it's just kind of roil and spoil the whole environment.
So good question, good point. But why do you think they can't or won't do it, despite personally feeling that they should, that it's bad? And at the same time, do take the kneel for Black Lives Matter, which is welcome, but looks a little out of place. It's almost looks hypocritical. I know it was an effort everywhere in the game, but I'm aware of that it wasn't under some direct orders or something like that. But they do that, and yet they don't support. Why do you think?
I think there's an element of fear. There's no question. I mean, that is very, very clear. Like in the cinema industry, we've seen. I mean, the very few open up and make statements on behalf of somebody else being maligned or persecuted on social media. So there is a threat because they are public figures, and it's easier for them to become targets. That I think is obviously a very major fear, that they end up becoming targets. So they would rather deal with it, I imagine. They think that rather deal with it privately rather than publicly, which I think is a halfway house which doesn't really help, halfway measure which doesn't really help in confronting and getting rid of the problem. I'm not saying that every time something happens you come out and give statements, because that will make it pointless. But when there's something which has seriousness, which has the dimensions of becoming really serious, and it really reflects poorly on the team itself if they don't open up, like the Shami case, for instance. I think they should. Maybe they don't need to give a independent statement. They can give a joint statement that the Indian team, this is what the Indian team feels. And that's very powerful. The BCCI came out with a tweet. It was very well done tweet with Shami and Kohli and saying upwards and onwards from here, which served the purpose, I think, of the BCCI, and that's how it should be done. But suppose the team, I'm just thinking aloud, suppose the team gives a signed statement saying that we don't believe in this and we don't think this is fair to our colleague and this should never be done. Everybody in the squad automatically becomes a signatory. And then something like that can be done without the threat or the fear of saying, I'll get individually targeted.
So, that was very, very well put. And I think, as always, ever since I've known you, that was very directly put. Coming to the fact that you are a veteran, a senior journalist, that is the phrase that is constantly used about all of us, is the question, having seen so many transitions, where do you think the next the game is heading? Maybe new formats to fit in with lower attention spans, more innovations, maybe even audience and fan fatigue. I don't know. I'm asking you, tell us where it could be heading.
Very interesting, Sidharth. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to gaze into and come up with an answer, but I can take a shot at what I think it could happen is, look, there is a desire amongst cricketers and some administrators, not necessarily the BCCI, though it's veering around to the view that let's get cricket into the Olympics, and therefore it becomes the fear of the BCCI and all the cricket boards actually is that then, because cricket is an independent sport, independent of governments in most cricket playing countries, except, some of them, like Zimbabwe or in Pakistan, for instance, the patron is the president of Pakistan. It's more, there's a political participation in it, and in Sri Lanka, which is not there so far in India, certainly not in England, not in Australia. In South Africa, it's again, yes and no. So how to get it into the Olympics is a challenge, but a lot more players are thinking, because the ultimate glory in sport is seen as the Olympics. So Test cricket can't be part of the Olympics, T20 can't, one-day cricket can't be part of the Olympics. Can T20 be? Perhaps. Can T10 be? Most certainly. So that could be a more tweaking of a format, or one more format, which is, to me, somebody like me of my sensibilities, having seen so much of Test cricket, very disagreeable. If 10 overs tak leke aaya, then you might as well have 1 over. T20 itself is for many, it's an abomination, but it's got its entertainment value. So getting into the Olympics is one big desire. Maybe it'll happen as a demo game in Paris and subsequently in 2028, and then subsequently it gets into the Olympics. It needs a lot of pushing, and that the biggest push has to come from BCCI. It's the most powerful body. If it wants, it can manage it. And this is one of the things which I keep saying wherever I keep writing, that the BCCI today, it is so rich and so powerful, 70% of the eyeballs, 70% of the revenue. It should be in the vanguard of ensuring that changes. It must provide the vision and in the vanguard for making the changes that makes cricket a truly global sport. That said, the other change which I think is imminent, in my opinion, is that the IPL will become the system and everything else will get plugged into the IPL. So let me explain. The IPL today is a 7-8 week tournament in a year. Now 2 more teams have been added. Whopping money, 12,000 plus crore for the 2 teams. And you'll need players. You'll need an expansion of the tournament from 8-10 weeks. It might become 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks. That means every other country's itinerary and fixtures will have to be rejigged because this is the most rewarding tournament. It will offer the most money. So IPL will become almost like the mother cricket system, and everything else then starts plugging into the IPL and the dates available and so on and so forth. This is, it's something that I see on the horizon. I don't know how it will pan out, but really these are the 2 things that I think are where changes could happen. One is looking at how to get into the Olympics. The other is what happens if the IPL becomes 4-5 months long in the year. So many other engagements will have to diminish. And what will be the ramifications of those? It's something that is best left to conjecture.
Yeah, so that's a good way to wind up, because you are looking at the future. You obviously have a lot of sense of the past. For listeners, this will give a unique perspective, perhaps one that they can further expand by looking at things like your book. There are a lot of great cricket books out there, but not something like this, which is a comprehensive look at a period of the last 75 years and tells us how cricket has developed, of the highlights, some of the lowlights also, and bring us up to speed. As I always say to people, I am one of those who thinks pajama cricket is now part of our, as it was called when outfit became colored, became part of our international cricket consciousness and structure. But at the same time, I think IPL has become, kind of really turned it into gladiator sport, entertainment, and all that. So I'm not sniffing about the old days and feeling nostalgic, but I do feel that some changes are important. At the same time, they need to be very cleverly managed. Having said that, I have to say thank you, Ayaz, for showing us your passion, your knowledge, and your direct speak, as it were, about what are the good features of the game today and what are the features that need to be, there has to be a course correction. I would say even among audiences. So thank you for joining us on the Wire Talks, Ayaz Memon.
Thanks a lot, Sidharth, for having me. And I think I wish it was a comprehensive collection, anthology, but there's so much there in Indian cricket. I've just done, I think, a part of it, and maybe there'll be an Indian inning, second innings of the Indian innings. So we don't know.
Yeah, I hope so too, and maybe even a third. Though you have said at the end of the book, draw of stump. So yes. I don't know what that means. So that was Ayaz Memon. As usual, ever since I've known him, known his writings, talking about the game he loves with the passion. From here, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks team, thank you once again for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another guest to continue this the series has really got very increasingly interesting and inspirational almost, and certainly in terms of spread of context, perspective, knowledge. And we'll be back again next week. Till then, goodbye. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Learn how to minimize your alcohol intake on The Habit Coach with Ashton and guest Molly Watts, author of the book Breaking the Bottle Legacy, How to Change Your Drinking Habits and Create a Peaceful Relationship with Alcohol. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus in conversation with Manisha Kapoor, Secretary General at the Advertising Standards Council of India, about ASCII's Gender Next study, trying to rectify gender disparities in entertainment and ads. On Press Decode, Sarah Bagda and Prafulla explain the drug bust in Aryan Khan's case and give some details on the Alec Baldwin accidental shooting. On the Wire Talk, Sidharth and Professor Chandok discuss the Indian National Congress's loss in seats, popularity and relevance. And on GayBCD, Farhad and Sunetra share their experiences and coping mechanisms dealing with rejection in one's personal and professional life. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, Coinswitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, Kotak Mahindra Bank, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
What if you could relive some of the biggest and most public feuds in Indian corporate history?
Peer back through the window of time to see who among HUL or Nirma stood on top.
Or who was more dominant between Tata Motors and Maruti Suzuki?
Tune in with me, Ambi Parmeshwaran,
And me, Anupam Gupta, on Bank of Baroda presents The Last Brand Standing,
where we talk about two brands vying for the top position.
and what their journeys were.
Every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast app or website.
Or wherever you get your podcast from.